So, today we're going to be talking about this book, Brainstorm by Dr. Dan Siegel. You guys see me too in like a video, hopefully. Um, so this book, if you can see it, looks just like the picture there. It's a good one. It's been out for I think about 10 years. What year did this go? Like 2014. But what I really like about it is that Dan wrote this with the intention that parents and adolescents would read it together. Now, that might be kind of a high bar to expect that our teenagers are ever actually going to like read a book with us. But I think it's a nice idea. And there are especially some parts like stories that are useful to perhaps read with your kid and talk through because it gives you a neutral place that isn't you judging them about any of their behavior, but like hearing a story of something that happened to a teenager that's a real life story and discussing how can we learn from this and how can we make sure that something like that doesn't happen to you. Um, Before we start, I just want to give you all my website, theparentdoctor.com, and give you a couple of announcements. I have a podcast now. It's been out, I think, eighth episode just came out or is about to come out. It is the Parent Doctor podcast. It looks like this on Apple and Spotify. And starting in July, I'm going to be offering a paid subscription. I'm calling it Office Hours with the Parent Doctor. Basically, I know that there are a lot of people who have questions for a child psychiatrist or a child development expert. And I think it would be nice if everybody could just, for a very low fee, have access to ask their questions in person, live, or anonymously by submitting them for text messages or via email beforehand. And so this will be kind of a growing collection of recordings that will be accessible ultimately on an app that I'm also creating that should be live in about 3 weeks. So if you subscribe to this before July 4th at midnight, you'll be locked in at the low rate of $15 a month. And after that, it's going to go to $29 a month. You can go to booking at theparentdoctor.com/office hour waitlist. And I'll put that here in the chat. Booking. All right. So feel free to share that with anyone that might be interested. All right, so this book is all about the power and purpose of the teenage brain. Dr. Dan Siegel is a child psychiatrist who trained at UCLA and works at UCLA. Okay, Lindsay's there too. Cool, cool, cool. So he is one of my mentors. I really like him. He has just such a nice way of speaking. He's so down to earth. He's so calming. Um, but he is like an older white male and he's very subdued. So his energy level is also kind of low. He may not be for everyone. I really, really like him. I think that this book is great because it really helps us to reframe a lot of aspects of adolescence that otherwise can be kind of annoying and bothersome. I think teenagers in general get kind of a bad rap, but he really reframes this as something that we actually should really embrace and channel to keep it safe, to recognize the good in it, all the energy and creativity that comes with being an adolescent, but at the same time to recognize the neuroscience that's going on in their brains that does put them at increased risk and how we as parents can really help them channel that energy and creativity and novelty seeking behavior into ways that are hopefully safe for them and for us. So the first section of the book is in 4 big sections, just if you're going to read it, to give you a, like you can read it in sections. You don't have to read the whole thing. The first one is what he calls the essence of adolescence. He loves acronyms. Personally, I hate acronyms. I can never remember what they stand for, but this one is kind of easy. The essence is ES, emotional spark, SE, social engagement, N, novelty seeking, and CE, creative exploration. And basically, he's saying that these are the things that are really tuned up in adolescence, right? They are emotionally intense. He calls it spark, but it's basically emotional intensity. And we'll talk about the neurobiology of that in a minute. They are driven with social engagement, usually away from family. They're trying to define themselves and figure out who they are by interacting more with their peers and other people. And so we have to be aware of this, that that's just how they're wired and not take it personally. Novelty seeking is, again, hardwired into their brains. The way that they react to and produce dopamine is different than it was before adolescence and different than it's going to be after adolescence. But that really leads to increased risk-taking behaviors and a greater risk, threefold greater risk of death by accidental injury in adolescence. So some of the stories he gives in the book are really shocking and scary, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. But I think he also gives us good ideas on how we can channel that novelty-seeking behavior into ways that are safer for our kids. And then creative exploration. Kids really are good in adolescence at thinking outside the box, at seeing solutions to problems that we adults might not view as very solvable. And that's a gift. That's something that we really should be looking to them to help us with. And ultimately, he talks about the fact that these are good things. These are good qualities that we don't want to totally extinguish. But naturally, as we get older, they kind of fade and go away. And so sometimes they can feel a bit threatening when we see them in our kids because we've lost some of them ourselves. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the neurobiology, what's going on inside their brain. This is the second part of the book. So he basically talks a lot about two main parts of the brain, and he's talked about this in his other books too. He calls it the upstairs brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. That's the more evolutionarily advanced part of our brain, the part that really is our best version of ourselves, that can imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, that can plan, that can make decisions and regulate. All of that is growing, which is good news, but it's ultimately under construction. So it's vulnerable and fragile. At the same time, the limbic system, the downstairs brain, the fear center of the brain is also growing. So kids have shouldn't say kids, adolescence is a period of time when you have a greater ability to know all of the things that you should be afraid of. And sometimes that can be overwhelming. And we do see a lot of increased anxiety in adolescence. This is also overly sensitive. I just saw the movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Inside Out 2. It's about Riley, the kid who was in the first Inside Out movie, going through adolescence. And there's this wonderful scene where she is in the car with her friends, and her friend kind of makes this face. And basically, he talks in the book about neurological studies where they put adolescents in an MRI scanner and they show them neutral faces. So they show them happy faces, angry faces, sad faces, and just neutral faces. And during adolescence, kids are sorry, I keep saying kids, adolescents are much more likely to rate a neutral face as a threatening face. And so their fear center is really on edge. It's hyper vigilant during this time. So that, accompanied by the prefrontal cortex being under construction, can lead to a lot of this emotional instability, emotional spark, whatever you want to call it, that we see. All right, I'm going to see if this works. Oh, wait, I already have it here. I have it ready to go. I want to show you this funny video, but I'm gonna have to change my audio. So let me change my audio. Give me a second. Okay, let's see if this works.
Easy to recognize tweens growing older, predicting what.
Sorry.
So simple. To gain insight to the tween brain, we're asking people on the boardwalk some questions about good and bad ideas. Is it a good idea to eat salad? How about bugs with ice cream? Is it a good idea to go to the gym and work out?
I think eating ice cream with bugs on it is a horrible idea.
Going to the gym is a good idea. It's a good idea to eat a salad.
These questions might seem easy, even obvious, but it's not what you answer, but how you answer that says a lot about what stage of life your brain might be at. Young children generally answered quickly based on rules they've learned from grown-ups.
What? Swimming in water where there might be some sharks.
Grown-ups, of course, have learned these rules over a lifetime and also answer quickly.
That's a terrible idea to swim in water with sharks.
I think it's a terrible idea to swim in water where you see sharks.
Well, do you want to be fish bait?
But things are different with the tween brain.
What do you think about maybe swimming with sharks?
I mean, they're not naturally going to like hurt you.
Okay. You're on the fence as well?
Yeah, they wouldn't mean to hurt you. They just mistake you for something else.
Like a seal.
Swimming with sharks? Seriously? Why aren't our tweens outright rejecting a bad idea?
All right, so I love that because it just so beautifully emphasizes how their brains are hardwired during this phase of life to overestimate rewards and underestimate risks. And this is why we see such apparently stupid behavior coming from our adolescents. And they do things, and I'm sure if you think back, you also did things as an adolescent where you're just wondering, what were you thinking? And it's just that their brains are literally wired differently during this period of time. So I wanted to go to my notes on this one because it's actually pretty interesting. So Okay, peaking midway through adolescence and then decreasing as adolescence goes on. The baseline dopamine is a neurotransmitter chemical that essentially is involved in reward pathways. So the classic example is like rats taking cocaine. Then they will do that so much because it gives them dopamine that they will die because they'll stop eating. So dopamine is an extremely powerful influencer of repeating a behavior that causes us to feel more dopamine. Classic things also are like slot machines with intermittent reinforcement, right? Sometimes you win big, sometimes you lose, but ultimately that's a very dopamine enforcing pattern of behavior. In kids, though, during this time, during adolescence, the baseline dopamine is lower. So they're feeling more bored and things are more dull than they were before. This is why kids are like, they're all irritable. They don't want to do things with us. When we think they used to enjoy doing that and we get mad at them, it's just because their brain is literally not experiencing the same joy that it used to in response to whatever that trigger is. But the release that they get in response to a stimulus or a reward is even greater. So there's almost like addict behavior, what we get from drugs. And this is why during adolescence, kids are more prone to develop a substance use disorder. It's also, we kind of know this innately. If you think about smoking, for example, if most people made it through adolescence without starting to smoke, the likelihood that a 30-year-old is going to start smoking or a 25-year-old is going to start smoking if they didn't start when they were 15, we just know that that's low, right? We understand this. So we know that this is kind of part of what the brain does. There's also hyperrationality, which is concrete thinking, where the brains of adolescents weigh pros heavier than cons. And that's why there's this overestimation of reward and underestimation of risk. And he gives the example of the book, which is scary, of Russian roulette, and how if you were to be told, okay, I give you this gun, there's 6 bullet places in the chamber, but I'm only going to put 1 bullet in there. And if you spin it and you shoot yourself and you don't die, I'll give you $6 million. So the teen brain would be at high likelihood of making the calculation like, well, I have a 5 in 6 chance of winning. So the average person playing this game is going to win $5 million. Yeah, maybe I'll do that, right? But as a brain matures, it starts to see that that's still, even though it's a 1 in 6 chance, just not odds that are in your favor. So I think it's important to talk to our kids about this, to give them the preview if they're not yet entered into adolescence, that this is a change that their brain will go through, that you know it's going to happen. And that might be why you limit some of the things that you allow them to do, because you care about them. I actually was remembering back to when I got my license. My parents were really strict and I thought it was so just unfair because I was a responsible kid, but they wouldn't let me ever drive anyone else in the car with me. And I wasn't allowed to play the radio. Now, they weren't in the car with me, so they couldn't really tell whether I was doing it or not, but I followed their rules because they made it clear that they were really serious about it. And the reason was they knew that every kid you have in the car over 1 increases the chances of a fatal accident dramatically. And of course, back then we didn't have cell phones. We weren't texting while driving, but they also knew that like playing the radio and things like that could be distracting. So they were very strict for my first year of driving. And I think that probably was to my benefit. All right, so that's my thoughts about that. Oh, and then also this made me think about, I grew up again in the 80s and 90s where it was like the Just Say No, Dare drug abuse resistant education program of Nancy Reagan. And he talks about how that really doesn't work well for adolescents because they're not as motivated to avoid a risk, but they are motivated by something that is a positive value to them. So he gave the example that you can get kids to have a lower likelihood of smoking if you talk to them about how tobacco companies and the adults running them promote ads to target teenagers to get them to become tobacco addicts so that they can profit off of them. That will be more likely to motivate your kid to not want to be a smoker than telling them all the risks of smoking to their bodies. So again, you want to try to align with the positive values that your child has because you're much more likely to influence their behavior by appealing to that than you are to be playing up the risks. And I think that goes kind of counterintuitive to most of our adult logic because we are through adolescence and our brains are risk avoidant again. All right, continuing on. So we talked a little bit about this already, the emotional spark, how teens experience heightened emotions. That can be challenging for us as their parents, but it also drives their passion and their motivation. And so we have to really see that as a positive overall. And understanding this can help us empathize with our kids when they have these intense emotional experiences. The other good news is that even though their emotions tend to be more intense, they also are more short-lived usually. So kids can generally get over negative emotions more quickly than adults can. Social engagement, it's very important that we as parents have a thick skin when it comes to our adolescents. They are naturally going to place a higher value on peer relationships than they do on parental relationships. And he talks a lot in the book about all of the evolutionary factors as to why this is actually advantageous. And it's interesting, but basically it's to our societal benefit and our, collective benefit as humans to diversify our gene pool. So when adolescents are reaching sexual maturity, it's all these things are for that purpose, right? Like they want to underestimate risk and overestimate reward so that they feel brave enough to go out and venture out of their communities and meet new people. They want to venture out of their families and meet new people because that's going to help them again to populate and distribute their genes in a more diverse way that benefits our species and our community as a whole. And then novelty seeking, the teenage brain, like we talked about before, has a lower baseline dopamine, but a higher dopamine release in response to novelty. And so that can lead to a lot of risk-taking behaviors. And he talks about a really scary story of a colleague of his who was killed in a car accident by a 19-year-old who was driving a race car, I think in Mulholland Drive in LA, judging from the way he described the story. Basically, this gentleman was going to a dinner every Friday. He went with his wife, was turning onto the main road, and this young man was driving like over 95 miles an hour and T-boned the car and killed the driver instantly. So he said that that young man who drove it walked away from the accident, but it was his second major accident, and the parents had bought him a new sports car after he totaled the prior one. So he talks about how we need to, as parents, be aware that our kids are going to do these stupid things. And if there's evidence that they're not being responsible, we need to help them channel that need for speed in a different way. And he gives the example of how for his son, he used to take him, I'm on a Zoom call. Sorry guys. So he gives the example of for his son, he used to take him to that closed hospital parking lot on the weekends and let him ride his skateboard down the parking lot so that it was still potentially risky, right? But he made his son wear a helmet and pads, but it wasn't as risky as him driving 95 miles an hour down Mulholland Drive. All right, and finally, creative exploration. Adolescents, as I said, are naturally inclined towards creativity and innovation and thinking outside the box, and we can encourage this. And I've had some parents of my patients who've done this in creative ways. Like there was a young man he got caught spray painting graffiti in town, and so they decided to let him spray paint his bedroom. And so he got to like make a big mural in his bedroom. So again, like allowing within the confines of what is, acceptable to you, the need that your child has for creative exploration, rather than fighting that just because you want to be in charge. I think that that can be win-win if you can tolerate it. All right, so part 2 of the book is all about the brain changes and neuroplasticity. And we talked about this a little bit already about the remodeling that goes on in the prefrontal cortex and in the downstairs brain. The 2 main things that are going on in the brain are pruning, which is cutting back of neuronal connections, and myelination, which is speeding up certain neuronal connections. So there's a lot of plasticity, a lot of change that happens from the onset of puberty until about age 25. This is a period of significant learning and growth. And he states that it's important, if you're going to be an Olympic athlete, this is the time when you need to be practicing this. If you're going to be some concert musician, this is the time when you need to start doing those things, because really it's use it or lose it from here. And this is where I really get concerned about these, I don't want to call it screen time because that's such a broad term, but when I'm out and about and I see teenagers on their phones collectively as a group, and they're all like this on the devices, I really worry about the opportunity cost. It's not so much that I'm that worried about some game time or some FaceTime or whatever it is on the phone, but when it's not balanced with enough social interactions and enough other challenges, I do worry about this particular time in life, that if they're having hours and hours a day of, just consuming content or whatever gets popped up on their device, what is that doing for their pruning and their myelination? And there was a book that we'll probably read next year that came out called The Anxious Generation that's talking about all of this and how that may be contributing. And I think it is probably in part, for some kids at least, contributing to the rising rates of depression and anxiety. Again, I'm not saying that we can't or that we should completely prevent our kids from having access to phones. I think as especially older adolescents, that's probably not viable, but we can try our best to encourage kids to be aware of the fact that they can balance themselves by being involved in different activities and recognizing that this is an important part of life for them to be balanced. All right, so part 3 is all about relationships, connection, and sense of self. So we talked about this a little bit already. Risk-taking and emotional intensity are common in teens. There's challenges, and there are also opportunities for developing resilience, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. And I think the really important part is just keeping those channels of communication open with our kids so that when they struggle, when they have setbacks, we can always be the safe home base that they come back to, and that we are mindful of not being overly judgmental, of kind of holding on to a sense that we know they're going to get through this and be okay. And so there was one quote in here from a young person. I don't know if I'll find it right away. Give me a second. But I liked it a lot. Yeah. So the quote was, just let them be who they are at the time, not who you expect they should be. That was advice from a teen in one of his groups. And I thought that was really beautiful because I think so often, especially with the parents that I see in clinical practice, they respond to whatever it is that their teenager is going through as if this is the person that they are going to be, as if they are fully cooked, as if this is it. And that's not the case. It's never the case. You know, none of us are exactly the person we were, thank goodness, when we were teenagers. And so I think it's important for us to kind of stand back, see our kids going through this time, trying on different versions of themselves and self-identity, and being patient and confident that they're going to sort it all out for themselves and figure out what feels best for them for the best. All right. Next, he talks about, these are like these little interspersed sections of the book. So when you look at the book itself, I don't know if this will show up, guys, very well if you haven't seen it, but if you look at the spine, you see like dark gray sections and white sections. So the dark gray sections are what he calls mind-sight practices. And mind-sight is this term that Dan came up with to describe, it's sort of like a spiritual sense, an Eastern sense. It's sort of bringing that in, but in a very westernized scientific way. And one of them is time in practice, with the idea being that mind-sight has to do with insight, our sense of self, empathy, our sense of compassion for others, and integration, which is the me and we, like how do we fit as part of a whole? And time in practice could be meditation. It could be just like awareness practice. It can be breath. He gives a lot of great examples in there, but he cites research that says that doing this for 12 minutes a day can really be beneficial for our integration. And when he talks about integration, he's really talking about different parts of the brain and those pathways that connect the prefrontal cortex to the emotional centers of our brain, which really are important for self-regulation. And strengthening this during adolescence especially can be very, very helpful. So I think that that section, which is on page, let me find it for you. Page 111. It's a good one. All of this book, if you're going to read any part of it with your teenager or pre-teenager, I would start there. I would just read that section because I think that's the most valuable part. All right, then the wheel of awareness. Oh, sorry, this picture's not showing up. But basically, he has an exercise here. If you go to drdansiegel.com/wheel-of-awareness, you'll find that exercise. It's a meditation. And again, that's something that you could use with your child. The idea of the wheel of awareness was introduced in the last book, and I had a slide for that too. But basically, the hub of the wheel is kind of the stepping back into your sense of true self, your consciousness, your awareness that you have thoughts, your awareness that you have emotions, your awareness that you are a body, but being separate from that, right? Your true self is separate from the person who's speaking right now, the body that you're in, the thoughts that you're having, all of that, because it's observing those things, right? So it has to be separate. So the hub is not a physical place, but a mental place where you can go at any time. And then from there, you can reach the rim, which represents all of your senses, all of your emotions, what you feel in your body, all of those things. And so if you ever are feeling a negative emotion or a physical state that you don't like, you can change at any point by connecting through integration to your hub. And so this wheel of awareness exercise is kind of part of that time in practice. And then part 3 of the book is very interesting, I think, for us as parents. I don't know that kids will be this interested in this part, but he talks a lot about the research from attachment models. And if any of you have heard of this before, there's basically 4 primary attachment models. Most of us have a secure attachment. That means in infancy, most of our needs were met with a primary figure, whether that's a parent or some other caregiver. And so in the experiment, what they do is they take 1-year-olds, they come in with their parent or caregiver, they're in a room with some toys and someone else with them. And then the parent leaves the room for 3 minutes. And then the parent comes back and they observe through a 1-way mirror, 2-way mirror, I don't know how you say that, but there's someone behind a glass, right, that the kid can't see who's observing, and they're videotaping, and they see what happens to the kid. How does the kid respond to the parent's re-entry into the room? Securely attached kids will touch base with their parent. They might cry for a moment, but they're easily soothed. And then they return to exploring and playing with the toys in the room. That's about 50 to 66% of kids. Then there are kids who have an avoidant attachment pattern. That's about 20% of kids. And when the parent comes back, they'll kind of shun them, ignore them. And half of those kids, when they test them with the other parent, are securely attached to that parent. But basically, this is an adaptive response that the child has developed even at 1 year of age to the lack of presence from a primary parent. So if there's a parent who's always at work, or if there's a parent who's not usually there when the child wants them, they develop this kind of wall to prevent themselves from needing that parent because there's someone else who's hopefully more reliably present. Then there are ambivalently attached kids. This is about 15% of kids. These kids are extra clingy when the parent comes back in the room. And that tends to be, or the hypothesis is, because they can't be sure how the parent will react. Sometimes the parent is there for them and supportive and can meet their needs, and at other times the parent is not. And the child is seeking the responsive parent, and so they respond in this extra needy way. And about 5 to 15% of the total population responds in a disorganized pattern. So these kids are alternating between seeking the parent, being clingy, being distressed, rejecting the parent. And 80% of kids who are in a neglectful environment where they're not getting much parental attention will present like this. I'm going to give you guys a PDF after today's talk, and it's going to have a series of questions from the adult attachment interview, which Dan used in this book, and were present in one of his other books too, to guide you in your thinking about your own relationship with your parent or your primary caregiver growing up, and thinking how that might be influencing your personal attachment style and how that might influence your current relationship with your teenager. Because often, as our kids become teenagers and they start to go away from us and reject us, just like the parent did in this scenario with the 1-year-old, right? It can consciously or unconsciously elicit some of those same things. So if you yourself recognize that you might have some of these avoidant, ambivalent, or disorganized attachments based on what you know of your early childhood, then it might be helpful for you to kind of talk about that. And this is something for you to do with a co-parent if you have one as well. All right, so time between is really building this integration, and it's about having reflective conversations with your child. Our adolescent sense of self, as I said, is developing and changing throughout adolescence. And as parents, we really have to work on letting go of defensiveness and model the repair, of ruptures for and with our kids. So both in our relationships with them, when we have a rupture, a problem with them, that we come back and we say, hey, sorry, I was overreactive, or I said this and I was mad, but I really love you and whatever. And he gives a great example there of his son coming back home from college and not being as tidy as he and his wife are. And they had been empty nesters for a while. And he got really mad. And he told his son something like, well, if you can't stay clean, then you better get your own apartment or something like that. And then he felt horrible afterwards. And he had to come back and apologize because he told his son, like, this isn't your house, it's our house. And he realized that he didn't really mean that. And he apologized for saying it. So I think here it's normal. And I think it was beautiful that he shared that. And he was so vulnerable because here he is, this child development expert, world renowned, parenting guru, and he still loses his cool with his 21-year-old or 22-year-old, right? So we're all human and we all can do that, but we need to model the repair after a rupture with our kids so that they can recognize, again, that integration. None of us are perfect, but the repair of those relationships is really important. I think I love the phrase, be kind over being right. And I think for our teens, this is especially important to keep in mind because they test our limits a lot. And then I do encourage you to consider how your own attachment style or attachment model that fits you best might be influencing your parenting style or your current reactivity to your teenager. And consider how your own attachment model may be influencing how you are developing trust with your teenager. The ultimate goal as we're raising our kids as they reach adulthood is not that they follow the rules that we think they should follow because they have an internalized version of us and that they feel like mom or dad is going to be mad at me if I don't do X, Y, or Z. What I want, at least for my kids, is not that as much as I want them to have a strong sense of who they are and a desire to not do things that aren't good for them because it's right for them. I think that's much more powerful. I guess in some ways that's an internalized version of me, but I don't want it to be my voice they're hearing, but their own. And so I think really if we can consider how we can trust them by letting them know, I trust that you'll do what's right for you because I've set you up to know what's right for you. And to really be, again, like he gave that example with smoking, play to their values, help them develop their own values. And that will really help them to hopefully make the right choices, not just when they're under our roof, but also in the future. All right, part 4 is all about parent-teen relationships. He talks about keeping open communication, freely sharing information, being honest and clear, listening to other perspectives, seeking to understand. This is kind of like level 5 listening that we talked about in January with 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families with Stephen Covey, where you really seek to understand not just what your child is telling you, but the emotion behind it without judgment. And that builds trust, reduces misunderstandings, and enhances collaboration. Empathy and understanding between children and their parents at this age means recognizing and sharing each other's feelings and perspectives. And it helps to build strong, trusting relationships and promotes effective communication and support within the family. So again, you don't have to agree that your child is right, but the key is to really let them know you hear what they're saying and what their opinion is, and that it's important to them. Mutual respect, again, that involves valuing each other's feelings, opinions, and boundaries, recognizing when you are telling them, no, you can't do that, that you recognize it's hard and that you know that they really want to, but you can give your reasoning, and ultimately you're the parent, so you get to make the decision, but you don't have to just come down because I said so. You can kind of explain why and that you understand how important it is to them, what they want, but that you're not letting them have that for whatever reason. And then presence and support. Let me find my phone again, because there was a really nice section about this where he talked about on page 37, he said, as adolescents prepare to leave, he hopes they will know that they have a home to come back to, or that they will find a way to create one of their own. So again, like hoping that you can offer a safe haven for your kids, either physically or at least emotionally in the future, so that they don't have to feel like at 18 they're out and that's it. Because adolescence is a period of brain development that really continues until the mid-20s. So that's something for us to keep in mind too. In the final section of the Mindsight tools, he has this, what he calls like a platter of healthy mind, brain recipe platter or something. And he talks about the importance of sleep, the importance of physical activity, the importance of focus time in like that self-reflection, meditative, mindful practice, downtime, just relaxing, unstructured time, playtime, social engagement, and connecting time, like deep conversations. And I think this is another thing that's very important to discuss with our kids and our kids when they're away at college and all these things, because when I have treated young people who are really struggling with their development, with depression, with anxiety, these things are usually off balance. Oh, actually not usually. There's always room for improvement here. So it's within their power, and they need to recognize this. Again, talking about helping them instill their own values. Like if their value is to have a healthy brain and a healthy body, it's within their power to make sure that they are taking care of these things themselves, right? Nobody else can sleep for them. They have to make that decision to prioritize their sleep. No one else can work out for them. They have to make that decision to move their bodies and exercise in some way. So these are things that we really don't want to blame our kids about or shame them about, but help them recognize that this is what we have to do. There's no getting around it, right? This is what it takes to have a healthy brain and a healthy body. So more practical tips for parents, again, encouraging open dialogue about emotions and experiences, talking about your own experiences in adolescence, telling stories, fostering a supportive and not judgmental environment, promoting healthy risk-taking and creative activities. I love that he gave that example of like his son's need for speed and coming down the parking lot on his skateboard. And he also talked about how there are places where you can send young men away to do racetrack racing and stuff. Again, is it totally risk-free? No, but it's certainly safer than allowing your kid to zip, 90 plus miles an hour down the freeway. And then practicing mindfulness together. I have to admit, I do not regularly practice mindfulness with my kids yet. And I guess that's something I'm curious if any of you are doing that and what it looks like for you. If you are, go ahead and comment in the comments if you are. So finally, the conclusion for today is that adolescence is a time of profound growth and transformation, that we can really shift our paradigm and thoughts about it, though, by understanding and supporting that teens are going through something that is temporary and that brings a lot of good with its struggles. And we can help our kids navigate this successfully by building strong, lasting relationships with them and keeping the lines of communication open. Let me just go to a couple more notes that I took. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Oh yeah, he gave another great story of a young man he had in therapy who, this was probably years ago, I don't know if this is still in fashion, but you know how the boys used to wear their pants way down so that their boxer shorts would show, and then they would have their belts like really low. And he asked him like, why are your pants so low? And this adolescent said, I'm doing that to not be like everyone else. And so it would, or to be like everyone else who's trying not to be like everyone else. So he wanted to fit in with people who were making it clear that they weren't like everyone else. And that was so classic for adolescents. And I think we see that in every generation of adolescents in different ways. And he talks about how that is a part of an adolescent's courage to not be like everyone else is adaptive for our species. And we need to shift our thinking paradigm away from irritation with that and instead be grateful and amused by it, which I thought was great. Yeah, so the part about attachment is a big part, and keep an eye out on your email inbox, because all of you who are on my list are going to get the PDF that has those attachment questions. And if you have any comments about it, or if you want to talk about it, I'd be happy to set up another meeting to discuss that too, because it might trigger certain things in you. I know for me, like going through this, remembering my own adolescence, it did make me think a lot about what that experience was like for me. And yeah, and it's tough, right? It's not like always the most fun time of life, but at the same time, it is a very unique and energized time of life. So it's something that we can also look back on fondly, even though inevitably there's going to be some hard times there. I hope that was helpful to all of you. And if you want to sign up for the book club, if you haven't already, to get the replays and to get the PDF, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. And then if any of you want to join the office hours, that's going to start it's always going to be on the first Friday of the month at noon. And again, that's in the chat, booking.theparentdoctor.com/office-hour-waitlist. And you can sign up there. All right. Great to see y'all. Bye.